Alright, campers. You all have heard me use the Flintstone Jetson analogy before. So, Flintstone is in red. And it's in red because those are analog systems. Okay? This is the kind of thing people are telling you to avoid the digital control grid. Okay? The digital control grid is just like a place called Azeroth, okay? It's like World of Warcraft. And where my hand is, right here, this is three-dimensional space. Do not confuse a system where you eat and poop for a system that is inside that phone or in cyberspace, or vector space, Azerothian dynamics. Do not confuse where the Flintstones live and where the Jetsons live, because the Jetsons know better. They don't live in Azeroth. And this is where I will give the boomers credit, but a warning. Boomers, you did not grow up with video games. That is not an insult, it is a description. Because you did not start prior, between the ages of 7 and puberty, you were not sitting down for 30 to 90 minutes at a time, performing 120 to 300 actions per minute. You didn't study like this when you were a kid, unless you were a concert pianist or a drummer, some sort of machine shop guy. There's a couple of things. To give you an example, not too many Jetsons came out of the boomer world, but one of them's name was John McAfee, okay? And let me tell you, it took cocaine just to keep his head on his shoulders. So when I say the boomer world is incompatible with the Jetson world, it's not. It's incompatible because they're different, not because there isn't a Venn diagram. So red is the old stuff, blue is the new stuff, and purple are where these things get mixed together. And if you don't understand that we're headed towards a Jetson world, and there's nothing you can do about it except learn and embrace which direction you're going to live. I said before, I'm in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is where the Amish live, and that is 2 hours from here. It's 2 hours and 100 years ago. So, because you're not properly understanding today and tomorrow, you might start looking back and saying, we could use cash. Obama uses cash. Shows up with $1 billion in cash in the back of a plane. Is that the type of syndicate you want to be part of? When I say we get blockchains instead of central banks, the central part of the central bank is the problem. I put bank in purple. When you're trying to start a currency system, because currency does a function that money does not, there's not enough money, there's not enough three-dimensional objects in three-dimensional space to perform all the commerce that we perform. And trade is better than war. So these tactics go through commerce. And currency facilitates commerce. So it's a good invention. But then both banks and fiat get abused. It's abused mechanics. This is where I like to say, if you really need to understand what I'm talking about, you have to go play World of Warcraft. You have to go live in a place called Azeroth, because it's just as big as your planet. Well, okay, maybe it's not quite as big as Earth, but it's huge. When they say MMO, massive multiplayer online, they do mean massive. There's a couple of, EVE Online was a big space game. And when I say big, I mean gigantic. It could take you hours. You could plot a course with your ship, and it could take you hours to get there. There is nowhere in Azeroth that it'll take you hours to get there, at least after the first time. Once you go and you get your waypoint, you can go to that waypoint again. These are back and forth about. Everybody wants to talk about rights, but they don't want to talk about responsibilities. Jetsons only consent. They are the consent of the governed, and they do so by contract. If any of you believe that you are part of the Constitution, you are not. You are a believer. In the same way, you have the same relationship with the Bible and Jesus as you do the Constitution and the government. You didn't sign up. You believed. Your name is not on the Constitution. The precedent that the statutory system has been holding might be according to the Constitution, but that's where we get into David Rogers Webb, and a bunch of attorneys will just filter it out. They'll turn it into a tyranny system. Amateur Sith Lords will turn you into serfs or slaves. They don't fucking care. So, I give the boomers, the Flintstones, I give you 49% of the blame. If you need an attorney, you are technically illiterate. However, you're 51% forgiven, because those attorneys turned the statutory system into a pinball machine. And it's supposed to be a vending machine, not a pinball machine. You're not supposed to be a pinball wizard to get justice. So, if you think you understand this topic, I assure you, I've listened to everyone on the topic, and they are fucking clueless. None of them sound like they're attorneys. The attorneys have a clue, and then you get a nice, clean line where 97% of the attorneys are giving the other 3% a bad name. Because almost all of them are just trying to get their way. And they're going to contort the language, and whatever needs to be said, they will obfuscate precedent. That if a prosecutor can make a fallacious case and the defense cannot defend against the fallacious case, someone will be convicted because the prosecutor is either bad at his job or he's sinister. A bank creates liquidity for an economy so that everybody can not live on a farm. And I am not judging whether it is better to be a Jetson or a Flintstone. I personally would love to have a ranch with a bunch of stinky cows. However, trying to get an enterprise up and running is very difficult, and that is where banks come in. Now, some people say banks provide liquidity. Let's give a specific example about why banks are a problem because of fiat and usury. A bank will charge a carpenter interest to borrow money, currency, fiat, so that the carpenter can buy wood and be productive. Well, that's technically not correct. The carpenter is supposed to go gather his own wood, and we can argue about that one way or the other. However, why can't the carpenter print his own pile of fiat? Is the real answer. Is the real question you have to ask. There is no reason to have an institution called a bank that's supposedly dealing in a ledger when the ledger is fiat and inherently abusable. The usury is just a shitty concept. I don't mind interest, but I do mind compound interest. And I would say that usury is a compound interest. If you and I were to have a contract and say, I'm going to borrow 1,000 from you, or whatever's, and I'm going to pay back 1,050 or 1,100, that is our deal. You're going to borrow from me, you're going to pay a vig, but it's going to stay at that. As soon as you start compounding the interest, I would say that's usury and you have a fucked up game. I'm not saying you can't prevent other people from paying this game. I'm saying you know who the scumbags are when they try to do it to you. And then, everybody's been taught this shit. They think they're supposed to. They don't know. They're not making baseline ethical differences between why the bank is permitted to print and why the carpenter isn't, and why the carpenter's going to pay a usury instead of just pay back the fiat with a little bit of simple interest. Everyone's talking about the control grid. This is a digital phone book, okay? If you have a problem with your name being in the phone book, you're the fucking problem, and I don't care. I don't care. Everywhere on the North American landmass is accessible by car in under 10 days. We could say under 7 if you're really motivated. And if you want to start using aircraft, it's a hell of a lot lower than that. It's way less than that. So, tracking down problems in a control grid, well, having a grid in two-dimensional space, a Jetson grid that keeps an eye on the people on three-dimensional space. Some people would say that's Big Brother, and I'd say we're going to make Big Brother watch. We are going to cuckold Big Brother. We're going to make dude watch. You wanted to look, right? And that's where the blockchains come in. Everything on a blockchain statutorily becomes not prosecutable. So while people say, oh, you're going to lose all your information, well, there's a very, very small Venn diagram of information you need to hide from others because they'll use it against you, and information you don't give a shit about, and you'll just leave it on a public ledger. When you really understand the topic, this is far more of a savior than it is a control grid. It's also going to keep track of who prints money, because proof of work, not because someone has been granted a privilege. They've started up an enterprise that they're now going to they're going to debit you. They're going to create money. You go into the bank, they're going to assess you, and then they're going to create a debt. They're going to hand you $300,000 and then negatively attribute that to your account. And they're going to say, you owe us this back. And that really plays into the central bank. There's a lot of debt measured in USD that we're all supposed to go to the same USD vendors, the licensed and properly credentialed USD vendors, and we're supposed to only do our life in this manner. And that's not correct. And it would be. Like, if you break each one of these things down, it's not that these things are wrong, it's that they're incorrect. It's not that this is incorrect, it's not right. And this is clearly not right, because you're just trying to take advantage of someone. Very businesslike, but also very predatorily. It's more of this. It's more this than it is this. Okay? So when I say these bottom ones, this is where you really get to understand it. When you understand how a blockchain works, and you understand how these systems come together, you'll recognize that attorneys are licensed and lawyers are mislabeled. A lawyer is someone who is learned in the law. An attorney is licensed to practice. This license is completely unnecessary, but the British Accreditation Registry, the Bar Association, has mobbed up our whole system into getting everyone to believe that these things are someone else's discretion and we will obey. That's not correct. So when you understand how to turn the pinball machine model into a vending machine model, this is a statutory expert. It's not a law anymore. Laws are physics. No one violates the law. Okay? If you want to hear how stupid the sleight of hand the attorney is, they will ask you a question. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? Of course it made a fucking sound. Of course it made a fucking sound. Because the environment in which it happened produces sound. It's got nothing to do with this fucking guy's opinion or the elusive nature that if somehow the megalomaniacal nature of the accusation is that unless I or you are there to witness, it isn't real. Fuck you. There's so much shit going on this planet before you got here and after we are all leaving that you just have to recognize that until we invented camcorders and left one out in the woods, oh look, there was a sound when nobody was around. There were a bunch of dumb fucking humans who were legitimately looking at this like it was real science. It wasn't science. It was being sent into the fucking weeds, telling you have to prove something. That's not even, it's an irrelevant, but it's clearly there's a sound in the woods when you're not there because it was surrounded by the environment in which we all live in. There's an atmosphere here, and it will vibrate should anything move around. That's why I turned representation into self-harm. You think you know what you're doing? I guarantee the voters of America are clueless. They're clueless. So when you put them in charge of their own shit, they have to learn very quickly to play this game. And they will be playing against Azerothians. There's 3 generations of gamers laying around here, okay? I'm 47, I'm the oldest. I am the oldest possible generation of gamers. Before my generation, there wasn't video games. So when I tell you I've been training for this my whole life, it was really just to make sure that this is done correctly. When I say I was training, my video game stuff just keeps stuff straight in my head, but all the training at the War Department, These are our vulnerable points. These are all choke points. And if you don't know how to secure those choke points, you get fucked. And I don't want anyone to get fucked. I don't want any super users in a process. I know what a super user does. I know what a super user does. They use their position to advantage. And in Azeroth, we have both GM accounts, GM, a game maker, or a dev. What's the difference between a GM and a dev? In Azeroth, you have a player account. The GM shows up, he can do what he needs to do, and he can leave. He has admin access to Azeroth, and he gets to do whatever the hell he wants. A developer lives where we all eat and poop. And sometimes the developer has to stand up, and they go over to the server, and they push the power button, and says, I am the Lord your God, fuckers. I turned off your whole world, okay? Azeroth is down for maintenance because we said so. Well, out here, where we're all eating and pooping, there are no devs. There is no one who pushes the reset button on this planet. So anything that'll work in Azeroth that requires a dev to restart the server, there is nothing anybody can do around here about it. There is nothing anyone in three-dimensional space, not Donald Trump, not Xi Jinping, nobody can stop developer tactics in Azeroth being used here. That is the truth. It doesn't mean you know where the vulnerabilities are. My guild once took Lord Kazakh to Stormwind. If you go into YouTube and you type in Vanquish, because that was the name of my guild, and you type in Lord Kazakh, and you type in Stormwind, you're going to get a video. It's about 10 minutes long. And it shows my guild dragging a random world boss from this portion of the map where he lives all the way over to here to a city and turning him loose. And he could not be killed. So a dev had to show up and reset the server, had to put a line of code in there to make sure that Lord Kazakh could no longer be taken from his home over here and dragged all over the map, all over the world map. No, Lord Kazakh is only supposed to remain down here. Okay. But that required a dev to reset. So when you look at Azeroth, and you look at Earth, and you say, I have a tactic that would require a dev to turn this server off, and you try it over here, it'll work very well in Earth. Like taking Lord Kazakh to Washington, D.C. in the form of an automated legislature and see if any of these representatives know what they're doing. And they don't. They don't. All this chaos that we're looking at in the last couple of years, we are looking at fifth-generation warfare. We are looking at an insurgency of attorneys and representatives of foreign nations. Now, Israel wasn't the only one. Foreign actors behaving as super users upon all of us through the legislature. And if you think your vote matters, your vote goes towards a representative. It doesn't go towards anything in particular. If you think your representative matters, they intentionally screw over the parliamentary procedure in Congress is meant to be manipulated by those super users. They know what they're doing. They know what they did. Everybody's just catching up to this now. That's fine. Like, if you're unwilling to admit you've been lied to, you are the problem. We know it is. It's right there. So, understand that the systems I'm talking about, they work in bedrock for a Flintstone. Self-help is Flintstone stuff. Self-harm is also Flintstone stuff. But these games that we've all been told to play, those are to hurt Flintstones and to prevent people from becoming Jetsons. And when I say you need to do your own Flintstone versus Jetson homework, here's all your homework. If you think you're part of the Constitution, you're not. Go ask your attorney. The end. And if your attorney doesn't know that you haven't consented to the contract, welcome to social contract. You didn't sign the Constitution. If you think a blockchain is a digital control grid, you don't know what it's there for. That's all. Go learn what a blockchain is. Decentralized, open source, public ledger. Currency is a public good. You don't have a right to privacy in public. Proof of work. to make sure that somebody doesn't just print it up or declare it legal tender. For those of you who use the term legal tender, you are idiots. You are fucking idiots. Anything could be that. Anything could be that. The idea, you should hear the declaratory nonsense that come out of the government school kids. If you think you're signing up for a control grid instead of a digital phone book, ask yourself a question. Do you have a problem with your ass being in the phone book? The fact that it's digital just makes it harder to escape. None of us gave a fuck that we were in the phone book. None of us gave a shit back in the day. I was a kid. It didn't matter. We were, at no point, the movie Wolverines was in the movies. Nobody was worried about being in the phone book. Okay? The Russians will tell you they can't come to America. They can't invade America. Too many gun owners. The Second Amendment prevents more invasion than anything the Department of Defense or the War Department has ever done. Self-help. If you refuse to self-help, allow natural repercussions of self-harm to do these people in. There's no point in arguing with each other. Amateurs do not belong at the table. However, we have to invite everyone. So when I say there's no such thing as an NPC, there's no such thing as a goyim, I'm going to do a video on how that doesn't fucking work. But somebody wants you to think that you are better than other people. And I am better than you at this. However, I cannot be placed as a super user in the system. Otherwise, the system is flawed because it accepts super users, not because I'm better at this game than you. The end. Don't be a Flintstone. Your kids are going to be Jetsons even if you refuse. Learn your systems. Have a good week, campers. And good night to Velma, wherever you are.